adjusting to college, specifically how to create a collegiate experience that is all your own. As always, this presentation comes from the Counseling and Psychological Services Office. We are located on the 4th floor of the IU Student Health Center, and you can contact us by calling 812-855-5711. For today's presentation, what's important to mention is that all of these videos are going to function very similarly to any other video that you've already watched from this series, and be very, very similar to any of the live workshops that you might have attended. So what that means is it's going to be about 35 to 40 minutes long, and will allow you ample time to actually journal your responses to any of the journal prompts that are listed. There are journal prompts listed because it allows you the ability to really understand your experience from an individualized way and cater your understanding of the material to yourself and your unique experiences. To ensure that you have enough time for that, you will be asked to pause the video, journal your responses, and then press play when you are ready to move on. I do encourage you to actually journal your responses, so that means either pull out a pen or a piece of paper or type on your computer or on your phone, but actually record your responses to ensure you are getting the most that you can out of this presentation. So today we are going to focus on identifying adjustment concerns, especially as we're beginning college for the first time, really focusing on exploring how we create individualized experiences in college. So we're going to do that by exploring our identity, discussing adjustment and homesickness, discussing our limiting beliefs about college in general, and incoming expectations related to college. So this is just a list of common difficulties that an individual might experience when coming to college for the first time. We might be experiencing independence and freedom that is unlike anything that we've ever experienced before, especially if you're living on your own for the first time or living away from home in general. There might be differing expectations and perceptions of college norms, what's expected of us in college, separation and individuation, academic or career distress, so being uncertain how to manage your schedule, being uncertain what you want to do in your career, changing of relationships, this could be romantic, friendship-wise, interpersonally, also balancing the relationships between you, maybe your RA or your professor or other related support staff, identity and development, and certainly substance use. Now, if you have experienced a common difficulty or are anticipating a common difficulty that's not listed on here, that's okay. There are certainly plenty more difficulties related to adjusting to college that are not listed on this PowerPoint, but these are just 7 of the many that we see. Now, there are some barriers towards an individual being able to adjust effectively to college or just to an environment in general. Some of those barriers that we see are students feeling like they're unsure of what they can expect during an adjustment period. In fact, this is something that's often not really discussed amongst people. I don't often hear my students walking around and sharing with others that they're struggling adjusting. In fact, a lot of people, and I'm bopping all the way down to number 3, feel very alone and isolated. Like, because nobody's talking about it, that question of, okay, is there something wrong with me? Or assuming there must be something wrong with me, noticing and thinking everybody else is having a great time, no one else seems to be feeling this way. But because nobody's talking about it, we're really unsure of what we can expect during that adjustment period. Additionally, some of those adjustment periods might begin later for students. There's no perfect one-size-fits-all when it comes to adjustment and what that looks like and how it's supposed to impact us. Similarly, another barrier is expectations that relationships should develop quickly. We've all heard the phrase, this is the best 4 years of your life. You might go into this roommate relationship thinking and believing, okay, wow, I'm supposed to be best friends with this person, and if you don't hit it off right away, or if your relationship is more cordial and less best friendy, again, that can lead to some challenging cognitive distortions, just questioning, okay, so what's wrong with me? So we're going to enter the journal portion of our presentation. So what I want you to do is journal the following. What types of expectations regarding college do you have? So things like the best 4 years of your life, you're supposed to I don't know, party all the time, or you're supposed to be best friends with your roommate, or you're supposed to know exactly what you want to do with your life right away. Really question what those expectations are that you are coming into college having. And then also journal, how do you anticipate these expectations helping or hindering your collegiate experience? Again, please press pause, record your responses, and then when you're ready, press play and we can continue. Now, an old identity, just in general, is something that like you're kind of coming into. So you're coming out of high school with this old identity. Maybe you were a 3-sport athlete or you were the president of your student council, but ultimately you had this identity that you were really taking on in your community, within your high school, perhaps at work, within your family, all of these things that wrapped up into making you who you were during this period of time. And what can be really challenging is when we're moving into college, we're shifting and creating a new identity. We might not have as many of those activities or that same type of community, and that can create a bit of dissonance and conflict. So I do want you to pause to record your responses. And I know this slide looks a little bit different, but I do think it's important to really journal this and think about it. Question, what activities were you involved in throughout high school? Like, what made up your identity in that way? What were some of the best parts about high school, and how might you be holding on to this experience to guide you through college? Then ask yourself, is this helping or hindering you? What are some important parts of your identity as a high school student? How do you anticipate wanting to maintain this here? And are there any anticipated challenges to that? Pause the video, record your responses, and when you're ready, we can continue. So I do want to mention, just really pointing out how high school and college can differ. And in retrospect, I wish that I had kind of a Venn diagram between the two, but that's okay. So our high school experience overall, you might have had your parents, your teachers, or maybe another support staff person being your advocate. Usually there's somebody that's able to be there for you, advocating on your behalf in some capacity. Perhaps you had both, perhaps you had one and not the other, but ultimately you had possibly had somebody advocating for you. The schedule. So somebody else was involved in managing and controlling your time, between the hours of possibly 8 until 3 or 8 until 4, or maybe beyond that. If you were involved in extracurriculars, you knew exactly where you were supposed to be and when. And that was very, very well planned out. Usually there was 6 grading periods a year. So, you had multiple semesters and even quarters that you were graded on. So if you did quarters, you had more of an understanding as to how you were doing and what adjustments needed to be made to ensure that you got whatever grade you were needing or wanting to get for that semester. There was some study time required, but not as much as certainly there is in college. You were accountable to a lot of people, to your teachers, to your parents, to your coaches, to your directors of your extracurriculars, to a lot of different people. Your teachers in your classes are typically assigned. They're not always chosen, though there might be some flexibility there. A built-in community of people you've known for years, and often, but not always, it's free, though it's required. Now, the collegiate experience differs in the sense that you must be your own self-advocate. So you are needing to be the one that is watching out for yourself, being on top of your stuff. You are the person who is responsible for ensuring that you get to class, that you get your homework done, etc., etc. You're also the one who is managing and controlling your own time and schedule. So what that means is if you don't want an 8 a.m. class, you don't have to schedule an 8 a.m. class. Similarly, if you don't want to go to school in the evenings, you don't necessarily have to. Now, of course, there are some restrictions there depending upon the course that you're needing. Now, there's only 2 grading periods a year, a fall and a spring semester. Ample homework is required for each class, sometimes 2 hours per class per day, if not more. You are accountable to yourself. Yes, certainly we're accountable to the professors, but they're not reaching out to us in the same way that they did during high school. For the most part, you get to decide which classes you take and when you get to take them. There is a financial obligation there, and you are in charge of creating your own community. You might be coming in with a small community of individuals from your high school, but certainly not nearly as many as you might have carried through with you from elementary, middle to high school, and even through the extracurriculars you did as well. So as you can see, there are lots of differences between high school and college, and it is important that we adopt more of an acceptance-based mindset to this, meaning we can really question, okay, how could those differences be contributing to any difficulties or challenges I might be facing, and how can I accept them and make adjustments to ensure that I can find as much success as possible? So I do want you to consider your new identity. So question, what experiences are you looking forward to most in college? Perhaps it's new friends, control over your social life, making your own choices, culture, food, anything related to that. Maybe academics, actually studying something you're interested in. What have you noticed so far that is different? And what could, if anything, get in the way of you exploring your collegiate experience and new identity? Please press pause, record your responses, and then when you're ready, you can press play and we can continue. Now we're entering a pretty significant portion of journal questions because I really think it's important that we just break down the different facets of what can make adjusting to school a bit more difficult and can understand just our own individualized experience and how this might be contributing or not contributing to what we're going through. So I want you to consider, let's say you did really well in high school. Maybe you were a musician, an academic, an athlete. Maybe you did really well with your job. Perhaps you worked part-time or full-time, but you were doing really well in whatever identity and community you had in high school. You were considered one of the best in your school, and you're eager to prove your talents. However, once you get here, you find yourself surrounded by many people who are just as talented, if not more than you. This begins to impact your confidence. You're now questioning whether or not you fit in. How would you handle this? Take time, journal your responses, and when you're ready, press play and continue. The next one is you have tried out for a sport, music group, campus group, Greek life, whatever have you, but you were not chosen. This is upsetting because this is how you plan to make friends and form a community, which can be especially important on such a massive campus like IU. I want you to question what emotional reaction might you have in this situation and how might you go about resolving or coping with this? Press pause, record your responses, and when you're ready, press play and we can continue. The next journal question is you come from a small school, so you don't know many people on campus. You tend to be a bit shy initially, but you do want to make friends. You haven't connected with people in your dorms, and you don't anticipate becoming close with your roommate. You notice yourself spending more and more time alone. What strategies would you use to handle this situation? And I will say some of these questions might feel difficult for you to answer. And if that's the case, what I always encourage students to do is say and really question, how would you advise a friend? If a friend came up to you and said this, what would you tell them to do? What strategies would you encourage them to use? Sometimes taking that approach can be helpful. Record your responses, press pause. When you're ready, you can go on and continue. All right, so that ends the main portion of those journal prompts. And during a typical web workshop, I would encourage participation from the students through that chat feature to ensure that you are able to have the ability to really see other strategies that individuals are encouraging. But I hope that got you thinking about various concerns related to adjustment that someone might experience, as well as helping you have a list of various strategies in front of you right now. And now I just want to expand on them with my 6 adjustment tips. Perhaps some of them might feel repetitive to the ones you already came up with or allow you to expand your list entirely. My tip 1 is looking for support. So as I mentioned early on, you'd be surprised by how many people are also working to adjust to college and who may very well be struggling. You might also be unaware of individuals in the past who, might be further along in their collegiate experience who also struggled adjusting. And so what's important is that we challenge ourselves to be more open with one another about what we're experiencing, because this will increase the chances that we'll feel normal and validated, which is always helpful. It's like that experience if you've ever been in a classroom, you raise your hand, you ask a question that everybody was afraid to ask, and then suddenly it erupts in this very positive, normalizing, validating response. Now, the challenge to this is that we might not want to show those true colors. We might not want to show somebody, hey, I'm struggling. And so what I encourage you to do is, if it feels like that's a lot for you to really open up, question like, how can you make just like a small increment? What is like one step that you might be able to take in terms of being more open with somebody, and then continue to take accurate steps from there, being open, rather than feeling like you have to kind of go from 0 to 60 with it. So I want you to consider, how can you do this if you're nervous to open up to someone? Like, how can you be open and vulnerable with them if you're nervous about it? And what do you think could get in the way of being open with a friend or family member? And then how do you reconcile this fear? As always, pause the video, record your responses, and when you're ready, press play and continue. Tip 2 is trying not to compare. And this is so difficult because comparison is just something that everybody naturally does, especially when we have social media at our fingertips. It can be very easy to pull up Instagram, see all of your friends from high school at different locations having fun, and you might notice, okay, it's a Friday night, I'm sitting here by myself. I'm not doing that. Again, that can increase that cognitive distortion or that difficult mindset, questioning, okay, what's wrong with me? So we find that comparison is a thief of joy, and it can actually perpetuate any of those limiting beliefs that you might have about yourself. It can really taint somebody's confidence, and it can also perpetuate those expectations that you journaled about initially about how college should look and what it should be like in general. Comparison can also add to the level of distress you're experiencing. It can increase mental health concerns like apathy, depression, anxiety, lead to more social isolation. So it's really important that we do develop some insight to be able to question, okay, when am I more likely to compare? And how do I pull myself out of that? Perhaps it's curating your Instagram feed to ensure that you're only looking at things that help you rather than hurt you. The mute button on Instagram is a great friend of yours because you don't have to go through like that social recourse if you get rid of somebody, but instead they don't know that you muted them. You can just take them off of your feed or off of your stories for a while. So I encourage you to explore that. Now, I do want you to journal the following. How does comparison steal your enjoyment? How does social media perpetuate the likelihood that you will self-compare? And how can you allow college to be your experience and not anyone else's? This last one can be very, very hard to question and also vitally important because that's what college is. It's just that it's our experience and not anyone else's. Pause, record your responses, and when you're ready, you can press play and continue. Tip 3 is be proactive and try something new. So part of what we were doing at the beginning of assessing our previous identity is that can help us understand, okay, here were the various things that interested me in high school. What's important that I carry over? And we can use that to be able to assess what types of groups, clubs, work, volunteer opportunities, what do we want to do to be able to engage congruently with that thing that's interesting to us and important to us? So I encourage you to question, how can you proactively seek out groups or other individuals within that interest area? It could be joining a rec sport, a book club, a campus organization, a religious group. Perhaps it's joining a support group through CAPS. There is, I believe it's a Be Involved website on the IU website. It has a very, very robust list of options, and you're able to even just kind of parse through that a bit based on the varying interests you have. So I encourage you, research different groups and just try them out. Be experimental and open to them. See what can feel easy to integrate into your schedule, and attempt to do that now rather than later. As later on, when you're very, very busy, it can be much more difficult to find ways to integrate new time commitments into your schedule. Similarly, it might be really important that you think proactively about chunking your time out. So what I mean by that is it can be really challenging if a student thinks, wow, I'm not going to go home until Thanksgiving. That's a big span of time. Rather than finding ways to chunk it out can make it feel more attainable. So maybe it's chunking it out week by week. What do you have to look forward to every single week that you can focus on getting to? Are you able to maybe plan out visits to other people or have other people come to you or home more frequently to make that adjustment period feel a bit more manageable and chunked out? I do want you to consider that further by journaling the following. How can you chunk your time out to make it feel more manageable? How can you proactively join groups or set time aside back at home for friends or family to visit to make the adjustment period more manageable? Press pause, journal your responses, and when you're ready, you can press play and continue. Tip 4 is get to know the campus community. So what I mean by this is we basically need to try and help ourselves fall in love with IU Bloomington in general. And it's super easy when we're coming to a new space to basically compare everything to anything that we know in the past. So comparison's the thief of joy for ourselves, but it's also the thief of joy for our experiences. So you might be coming into it saying, oh, well, it wasn't like that in high school, or it wasn't like that in my hometown. You know, it's not as good as this, or yeah, I like my roommate, but they're not quite as great of friends with me as my friend Sally Sue was in school. Again, just the list goes on and on with the comparison that we can engage in from our previous experiences. And it can ultimately take away from our ability to fully work to get to know IU and the Bloomington community in general. Instead, it can just keep us in this very negative, pervasive comparison thought loop. So it is important that we challenge ourselves to gather some insight and awareness for when that comes up and be able to question how that might be hindering our college experience in general. It is also important that we work to adopt more of an acceptance-based mindset. Like, of course, your high school and past community experience is what you know. It is natural for us to lean on things that feel familiar. And so we do want to accept that, but accepting it doesn't mean that we aren't going to also actively work to change it and question how that might be hurting or hindering us. I do want you to question the following. How can you work to get to know the IU and Bloomington community? How can you practice gratitude for your experience here? And how do you anticipate yourself comparing Bloomington or IU to high school or your hometown? It's important that we do identify that right away, as that can help us acknowledge when that might come up and develop some good anticipatory coping strategies in the meantime. Press pause, record your responses, and when you're ready, you can press play and continue. Tip 5, and we just have 2 more tips, is to practice self-care. Now, adjusting to college can completely throw us off of our game when it comes to just like any routine that we engaged in, because it's so different. Amidst COVID-19, there's a lot of individuals who have a lot more free time because they're spending most of their time working from their dorm rooms or doing a lot remotely. Or even when we have physical in-person face-to-face classes, there are bigger chunks of time than what we were perhaps used to in high school. So it is important that we learn to recognize that we're in a new environment. We're working to manage a brand new schedule. So how can accepting that is the case help create an opening for us to be able to cope and manage that effectively? So I want you to really think about self-care practices that were important to you in high school and question how you can integrate them into your collegiate experience to create consistency and help you be able to manage those stressors in a more proactive and preventative way. So I want you to journal. What routines from high school do you wish to carry over? And again, question, are there any slight adjustments that will need to be made, bearing in mind that high school and college are not the same thing? What self-care practices are important to you and how can you make them a priority in college? And what self-care practices like nutrition, exercise, alone time do you anticipate will be hard to maintain, and how do you mitigate or approach those barriers? Press pause, record your responses, and when you're ready, you can press play and we can continue. My final tip is to find your strengths. So a lot of what you might be noticing is that there are various things that can trigger individuals to get stuck in a more negative thought loop. And what's really important for me in my work as a clinician is to help an individual identify the fact that they have individual strengths that they can lean on. Every single person has experienced a challenge in some capacity, whether that's a small challenge or a big challenge. Somebody has experienced something that they've had to overcome. That might be a loss, a difficult assignment, a parent's divorce, a breakup with a friend or a significant other. We've all experienced a challenge, and throughout these personal challenges, we've been able to rely on coping strategies, our support systems, and personal strengths that allow us to cope and move forward. Now, what's important is that when we get stuck in those negative thought loops, it can be really easy to forget that we've done this before. Again, we are just kind of the thinkers where it's like if a situation doesn't look exactly the same, we might not think of ways that we can use those coping strategies and adjust them to apply across different situations. So I do want you to pause and really consider that. What have you gone through before? What strengths and strategies have you leaned on? And how can you even lean on those now? You can continue to identify those personal strengths and lean on them even if that situation differs. So I want you to journal, what are your own personal strengths? Do you engage in comedic relief? Are you resilient? Are you strong? Are you outgoing? What are those personal strengths? And how can you use them to create a collegiate experience that is all your own and to manage loneliness and any adjustment to stress? Pause the video, record your responses, and when you're ready, we can continue. Now, I don't want you to forget the following. First of all, it's okay for you to ask for help, support, or encouragement from friends or family. It's okay for you to be honest and say, hey, yeah, the adjustment to college is not as easy as I thought it was. How did you cope with this? It's okay to say, hey, I'm finding myself not feeling as integrated as possible. It would be helpful for me to have some FaceTime dates scheduled home to be able to really just kind of create some consistency. That's okay for you to ask for that. Your success is also not identified by your GPA or your grade, despite how it may feel. And that's a really important differentiation. Feelings are not always facts. And so while it might feel like our identity is based on if we make the grade, it is important that we learn to question, is that actually a fact or is that just a feeling? It's okay if you don't get all A's, even if you did in high school. In fact, the name of the game is so much different, and it's not always realistic for us to maintain that same type of grade. We want to be able to really identify who we want to be, what's important to us outside of what we think we need to be or the narratives that we feel have been created for us about what college should look like. I also encourage you to take some random classes to increase your enjoyment, learning about something new and to expand your interests. Play around, dabble in different things. If something sounds interesting for you and it can fulfill a requirement, or, maybe even if it doesn't, ask your advisor, is this something that I can take without it possibly setting back the trajectory I have for graduation? Now, do things that interest you. College is certainly a great space for you to learn academically, and it's also more than just a space for you to build your resume. It is important that you really question, how do I want to feel when I leave college? What would I want in my collegiate experience to look like, and how can I start building that right now? Question that from an academic approach, a social approach, a work approach, a resume approach, a community approach, and so on and so forth. Check in with yourself. Are you engaging in these tasks to serve you or to serve other people? How are those expectations that you believe other people have of you or of their own collegiate experiences, how are those creeping back in and impacting you? And lastly, taking time for yourself is not selfish. In fact, it's just important that you find ways to regularly ensure that you build time in to relax and decompress, and ensuring that you rely on this proactively and preventatively, not just when you need it. And if that feels like it would be an important reminder for you to see all of these, I encourage you, take a screenshot, make this the background of your computer if you need to, just to have that nice reminder available for you whenever you are needing it. Now, certainly you might be recognizing that this was helpful, but it's not quite enough. You might be finding that you're wanting to expand on this through other workshops, or you're experiencing other mental health symptoms where it could be nice for you to be able to rely on another CAPS resource. Here are just some great ways to be able to determine if additional services are needed. There could be an increase in other mental health symptoms, changes to your personal functioning like sleep, appetite, or hygiene, reduced social, work, or academic functioning. Perhaps you're not going to class or you're not engaging in your social relationships, or maybe you are, but you're just engaging in them in a very different way. Of course, any thoughts related to suicide, harm to self, or harm to others, all of the above are all indicators that, hey, it could be helpful for you to give CAPS a call and see what resources we have available to be able to help support you and work through what you're needing. Now, first and foremost, we have a very robust list of service options, and the best place for you to always go for an up-to-date list of resources and information on CAPS is our website. As certainly, we are always making adjustments depending upon what's happening in our world and what we're noticing that our campus community is needed. But we are predominantly able to offer individual and group as well as couples counseling available. During COVID-19, those will be available via telehealth, and then once in-person services open, that will be available in person too. And I'm sure telehealth will continue even beyond COVID-19. We always have after-hours crisis lines and emergency appointments just by dialing 812-855-5711, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. That is a great way for you to access the phone crisis line. Again, you will be able to, during COVID-19 and telehealth, you will be able to have a phone or video emergency appointment. And then certainly when we have face-to-face services, you'll be able to walk in and have that service face-to-face. So if you are experiencing anything, whether that is during our business hours or after our business hours, you are always able to get in touch with us by dialing that number and after hours selecting option 1. We also have some great free drop-in appointments available. Now, these are not emergency appointments. So if you are just simply not wanting to wait, maybe you got a bad grade on a paper and you're recognizing, okay, it's not an emergency, but I do need to talk about this right now. A free drop-in appointment can be a great place to go for that. We also have sexual assault crisis services and other free workshops like this pre-recorded workshop. We have live workshops like this, mindfulness workshops, and lots more. You might be feeling really overwhelmed by this page, and if so, that's okay. The goal is not for you to know exactly what it is that you're needing, though certainly if you do, that's great too. Instead, I just encourage you, if you think that additional services could be helpful, give us a call at that same phone number, and you'll get scheduled for a 30-minute appointment with a counselor where you and that counselor will be able to work through what you're experiencing, and they will be able to help put you in the right direction of a resource that might be able to fit that need. Now, our sexual assault crisis service options, this is an extension from CAPS. The acronym is actually SACs. And so this is staffed by counselors who work for CAPS, but they're trauma-informed and they specialize in working with individuals who have experienced sexual violence or assault. So if you have experienced anything within option 1, which certainly includes that, but it's not limited to all of those above, if you are wanting to discuss that in therapy and think that working with a trauma-informed clinician could be helpful for you, SACS could be a great service for you to go through. Those services include individual and group counseling, support groups, psychiatry care, information and assistance with medical, judicial, or legal issues. And they also have their own after-hours crisis line. Please note that is different than the CAPS crisis line. It is 812-855-8900. And these services are available for all genders and all identities. And then last but not least, outside of CAPS, there's also what's called the Center for Human Growth, and this is on IU's campus. Again, it is not affiliated with CAPS. So if you are just looking into your various counseling options, that can be a great place to look into too. Again, I encourage you to visit their website for the most up-to-date information or give them a call. You'll notice just from this initial slide that there are some similarities to what we offer as well as differences just between pay, their hours available, so on and so forth. So again, as you're exploring different services and kind of determining what might fit your needs the best, I do encourage you to check out the Center for Human Growth as well.